Brian, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for coming, Nelly. Appreciate it, making the trip.
So, How the Future Works is a book you published recently.
In mid-May, Wall Street Journal bestseller. It's been a fantastic ride.
Exactly. How do you explain the success of the book?
So I think a lot of companies are understandably, and all of us are still grappling with what's it mean to make hybrid work? How do you make it work? And what we're finding as we work with a wide range of organizations is there's two things that are happening. One is, if you look at our research, it shows that people want flexibility, right? What most people want is they want something that's in the middle. 79% of people want flexibility in where they work. The majority of those people do not want to be fully remote, and very few people want to be full-time in the office. They want to come together, but they want to do it for socialization, for belonging, for some degree of collaboration. The other thing that came out really strongly is more people than that, 94%, want schedule flexibility. They don't want to have their 9-to-5 day jam-packed full of meetings. And figuring out how you make that work is really complicated. So the book itself takes a combination of that research and then also the work that we've been doing across organizations. Royal Bank of Canada in the financial services industry, Levi Strauss here in San Francisco, that's a consumer goods company, obviously, Genentech, a biotech firm, and tells their stories about how they're moving forward in ways that are really approachable, that will help people figure out an iterative approach to get there. Because the top-down, mandated, one-size-fits-all policy is just not going to work.
Exactly. And we've seen companies, unfortunately, backtracking from those policies. Like even when they were hoping or thinking they were flexible and hybrid, mandating 2 days or 3 days in the office was not allowing not only the location flexibility, people couldn't move out of those areas, and they couldn't really replan their schedule or their week because they had to be in an office from 9 to 5 or worse. Something that again in this book that was really, really rich and insightful was that schedule flexibility.
Yeah.
Like the pandemic has talked a lot about location flexibility, and work from anywhere now is a term that anyone can understand. Any companies, as you said, not just the tech world, but consumer goods and biotech and bank, schedule flexibility is still having resistance because somehow working from home hasn't given us the discipline of rearranging our week or months or year.
Arguably, working from home has kind of made it worse. I think one of the challenges that we've seen, and we've all felt it, right, is the video conference, the 30-minute video conference became the hammer for any given problem, right? And so if I needed to talk to you for 5 minutes, I would look at your calendar and schedule 30 minutes on it a week from now. And then we'd get on Zoom or Teams or WebEx or whatever, and we'd get the burnout factor and all that. But we wouldn't have had that 5-minute conversation. And so a lot of what we're doing with organizations is helping them think through, how do you think through the purpose of meetings? So there's this really key part of it, which is meetings should be to decide, debate, discuss, or to develop people. And if you are setting something up that's a status report, why are you doing that through a meeting? If you're doing something that is a 5-minute conversation, why are you scheduling that as a meeting as opposed to, I can just message you, either open up a Slack huddle or call you on your phone and say, let's just talk this out. So there's a lot of things that companies are approaching to tackle that problem. It's also really interesting. There's this big executive employee disconnect on how many days a week in the office that's all over the press, right? And that's the big discussion. This issue of schedule flexibility and making better use of our time is a place everybody aligns. But we put so little time and attention against it. I think it's a giant opportunity to make organizations better and individuals' lives better too.
What was your personal learning of this time that is not meeting focus?
I think the biggest thing for me was all the learnings that we found around diversity and inclusion. So a lot of organizations are realizing this, but unfortunately not everybody does. Your future of work plans and your diversity, equity, and inclusion plans are tied together. In our research, time after time after time, what we're finding is that Black, Hispanic, Latinx, Asian American employees want and value flexibility more than their white colleagues. At the beginning of the pandemic, we saw this right away. When we first went into work from home, sense of belonging on average dropped for teams. But when we dug into it, it actually dropped for white employees. Mm-hmm. It rose for Black employees. And these are all knowledge workers, and this was in the US. When we started digging into this, we grabbed a group of academics and brought them together. And Brian Lowry from Stanford, who's a fantastic expert on this, was the first one to say in one of these sessions, I feel this personally. As a Black professor working at Stanford, 9 to 5, 5 days a week, even on Stanford's campus, is taxing. I'm code switching all the time. The opportunity to work from home, even a few days a week, the opportunity to unplug and then plug back in during the day helps recharge batteries. So that's one factor. The other is caregivers. And we see this time and time again, and it shouldn't be a surprise. There were over 1.5 million working moms that were basically forced out of the workforce during the pandemic. But caregivers, time and again, tell us that they need flexibility, including schedule flexibility, more than non-caregivers. And in the US, it's women with children much more than men with children. 57% of working moms in the US in the first quarter of this year told us that they want to work in the office 2 days a week or less. That goes up every quarter that we measure it. In fact, we won't release this until next week, but I'll tell you that number went from 57 to 60% in the second quarter. So the demand for flexibility continues to grow. And if you're doing a forced mandate, 5 days a week back in the office, you're really going to blow it from a diversity perspective.
With the pandemic, we saw a boom of creators and original people, because they were maybe not the one who were the most talkative or the one who were able to take the space in a real room, but suddenly virtually they felt at ease because they were in a familiar environment and they started being more vocal.
Yeah.
And that impacts the richness of a meeting, the richness of the outcomes of that meeting.
It does, and it gives you a more level playing field. I'll give you another example in that space, which is fantastic. The whiteboard. So creativity and innovation and the whiteboard is one of these things that always comes up, which is we need people to come back in the office because I missed the whiteboard. The person who usually misses the whiteboard the most is probably someone who looks a little like me, a little older, white male, who likes to control the pen at the board. And by the way, I was one of those humans. The problem with that is there's plenty of research out there that shows what ends up happening is groupthink, right? Because you get into that situation and the more junior person who's newer to the team, the person who doesn't look like everybody else in the organization is going to have a much harder time chiming in. Mm-hmm. So my group practices this concept called brain writing. We will take a research report, for example, and we'll share it out with the team. And we'll ask people over the course of the next week to spend some time going through it and pull out the 5 most interesting salient points that you found in it. Write it down in a doc, don't share it with anybody, and at the beginning of the meeting, pile them all in together. And there's great research out there that shows this, and we've seen it ourselves too, that you end up with a richer set of ideas. More good ideas, more bad ideas, just more ideas. And that way, all those voices are also heard, and you're not pre-filtering things. You're giving the introverts a chance to get their thoughts together and get the word out. It's just a much better way to actually drive innovation, it turns out.
Exactly. I think this is where the book really struck me, because on an individual level, we've all changed. Our relationship with work, our relationship to our team, our relationship to ourselves, also like the self-discipline, what we allow ourselves, where we restrict ourselves have changed. And the book allows individuals to really expand because it gives that framework that needs to come from the top, because we're still reporting to an organization.
That's right. And that's I mean, the book is called How the Future Works, which is a little bit aspirational sounding, but the subtitle, Leading Flexible Teams to Do the Best Work of Their Lives, is really important because it's actually about those teams. It's about the individuals on those teams, about opening up opportunity for them. And you need to think differently as a leader, this is kind of hard for some people. We walk through this a little bit in the book. I need to not start with policies, I need to start with principles. And I need to give people purpose in why they're doing what they're doing. And if I can achieve that, it's much easier to align them and to unlock a lot of potential in them as well. So those principles, followed by the guardrails, the examples we just talked about, are the great sort of first steps that you can take as an organization. But there's a lot more to it also, just in terms of thinking about how we have to reskill managers, how we have to think about experimentation and iteration, because no matter what month we're in, this is never done. It's a process of ongoing evolution and learning that I just think is a fantastic opportunity for us.
Exactly. When I was reading the book, I remember like being in the middle of it and feeling like, it's a lot. Like, it's a lot. Like, where are we going to start? When are they going to take the time to stop again and start with principle, reskilling managers, code? And then there was that one sentence that was an enlightenment. You talk about taking a leap of faith. There's all the data, there's all the research, there's all the new behaviors that happen, there's all the goals we have for the future. But we're going to require that also line of leap of faith to experiment and go with it.
There is that. I will say though too, especially when you get into larger organizations, what we're finding consistently is there's already someone in your organization that's doing some of this. There's always that pocket of individuals. It may be a company that you acquired, it might be a group that's in the technology space, it might be a group on the marketing team who's been doing things a little bit differently. And they are your champions. They are the people that are trying and experimenting with new ways of working. You'll see it in their employee engagement scores. You'll also see it in their performance, because those two are completely correlated. But finding those people and using them is really powerful. We always coach people to use our research to sort of back your arguments up, but do your own research and find those people, because the internal storytelling is hugely valuable.
Can you give us one of your own learning of your relationship with work before pandemic and how you changed?
I've changed dramatically. This whole thing for me is this phrase, culture eats strategy for breakfast, that I actually learned the hard way. I'm a former consultant that, as I went into startup mode and was a startup CEO, was really challenging for me, because I didn't understand how to inspire and lead teams. It took me a while to learn that skill. And what I quickly learned, though, is that unless the team itself is actually motivated and going in the right direction, nothing else actually works. And so I've spent the last 20 some odd years after that practicing that. But even the past 2 years, I've learned so much. And I'll give you one example. I'm one of those leaders that always said, I sometimes work odd hours. If I send you a Slack or an email late at night, I'll say, don't worry about this until the morning. That doesn't work. It doesn't work. People's minds don't work that way. If the notification goes off and they read it, they're either going to have a bad night's sleep thinking about it, or they're going to sit there and say, I should just deal with this right now and take care of it so that I can have a good night's sleep. And that's not reasonable. So I'm a big fan of scheduled send. It's pretty easy, right? I just queue up a bunch of stuff. It goes out at 9 o'clock the next morning. If I don't really need you to pay attention to it, it can wait. And especially on the weekends, it can wait till Monday. And that's just one of the learnings that actually came from my own team going, that doesn't work, Brian. So it's been really helpful.
Thank you so much for sharing so vulnerably. And my last ask is, would you sign my book?
Absolutely, glad to. Glad to sign a copy for
your
you.
book, you'd sign
Nelly,
my copy.
Absolutely. Nelly, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure.